大家好，我是 Cecily。很开心在今天的占星观察室里面，我邀请到这一位占星师，是我近期在土耳其认识的一位澳洲的占星老师，他叫做 Shu Yap。这位占星老师他目前是在开普勒学院这一所在占星界相当权威的学校里面任教，而且我自己呢在个人上面跟他有一些 overlap 的地方，因为当我们在土耳其认识的时候，我们其实是现场两位看起来背景都是华裔的老师。那不过素呢他自己本身其实他原籍是马来西亚，也刚好就是我现在的现居地，所以我们两个就很快的熟悉起来，然后很快变成好朋友。在今天我邀请素来到我的节目里面，因为也是一样，我想要听听他在近期的一些世运的这些行星的变化，他有他的一个独到的观察的角度，所以这个内容对于我来讲其实也是我想跟他学习的地方。那我们就来欢迎我们今天的来宾 ShuYap 老师。Know Your Stars on Your Life 沙塔占星学院最受盛誉的核心课程即将要开学了。我们这套核心课程能够将一个占星新手一步步手把手教你从最基本的古典占星的知识，一直到深入完整理解整个本命盘以及预测的能力，让你不仅学到了占星的知识，而且学到了怎么样看懂自己的人生，掌握自己生命的一套方法。所以能够学习一套了解自己人生的课程，将会成为你一生都受用的最好的投资。Hello, Sue.
Hi, Cecily. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, so nice to see you again.
So lovely to see you again. Thank you for your introduction. I don't really understand what was said, but I recognize a couple of words.
Oh, okay. What words you recognize?
Australia. I recognize.
Australia. Okay. So you know Aujo? You know Aujo
Yes.
means Australia.
Yes, I've never really learnt Mandarin, but it was more Cantonese that my family spoke. So that's quite a similar way of saying it in Mandarin to Cantonese.
Yeah. So can you recognize like Malaysia?
In Malaysia, no, not really, but there are lots of mix of Malay and Chinese in Malaysia. So it's not pure Cantonese. So yes, sometimes I don't even know if it's a Malay word or a Chinese word. I just know the word.
Yes. In fact, this kind of experience for me is also very interesting experience when I stay in Malaysia. Then everyone can speak a multi-language, and they even put the multi-language into one sentence.
Yes,
so
that's how I grew up speaking. It's very a Piscean way of communication.
Very Pisces way. Yeah, Mercury in Pisces.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, and so before we talking about the recent planets, there are so many planets shift into a new signs recently, and so we know you were going to have very big changes. So like I already interviewed with Honor, you know Honor, and you also know Mary, and also we respect the teacher Joy Usha. Then I invite them to do some talk about this big shift. And so today I would like to know your personal opinion. I know you have a very unique perspective for this big shift. So I'm looking forward for your sharing with us.
Yeah, and look, essentially we're referring to these same outer planet movements that's happening this year in big ingresses and sign changes. However, I'm not a mundane astrologer, which means I don't really focus my work on looking at, say, things like geopolitics and what's happening around the world. My love is like understanding the personal sphere and the psychology behind a person. So I'm always looking at these big planets and seeing what does that mean for the individual. and the individual as in your life. How does Neptune and Aries differ for me in my life, and how does it play out in your life? And I teach a solar returns, solar revolutions course at Kepler College, and I think this week we're on the week of looking at consecutive solar returns. And one of the practices that I get people to do is to take these big planetary ingresses, say Uranus in Gemini for the next 7 years or whatever it is, and run solar return charts for each of the 7 years and look at which houses Uranus is falling in for every year, because it will be different for you as it will be different for me. And by tracking the revolution charts over the 7 years that Uranus makes this ingress, gives us our personal story of Uranus moving into Gemini. These are the kinds of things that I try and do to translate big mundane transits into a personal sphere. And yes, hopefully I can bring a slightly different perspective. I will be bringing a different perspective to what Mari and Joy and Ona probably has given. But one thing that I thought was really interesting about the time that we're in now is that, and we're in August 2025. This is the month where we've had all of the big planetary ingresses already occurred, the ones that we were expecting in 2025. So that Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries. Then we had Uranus moving into Gemini. We've got Pluto's already in Aquarius. And then recently we had Jupiter going into Cancer. That's it for the ingresses this year, for the first ingresses this year. What I was particularly interested in looking at is that Pluto is now at the early degrees of a air sign. Saturn and Neptune are early degrees of a fire sign, which are in sextile to Pluto. Then we've got Uranus in a sextile degree aspect to Saturn, and Neptune in the 0 degrees of Gemini. So what we're seeing forming are these sextiles. And then next year, we'll also see Jupiter move into the early degrees of Leo, forming another fire and air sign sextile. So if we can get 6 points of these fire signs and air sign combinations activated, it forms what we call a Grand Sextile. And that's quite a rare configuration. A Grand Sextile is made up of 3 oppositions, 3 trines, and 3 sextiles. So that doesn't happen very often, and for that to happen with 4 kind of permanent planets, planets that are going to be in that sign at least for 12 months in terms of Jupiter, that's pretty special. It means that every time a fast-moving planet moves to the early degrees of the missing points of that 6-pointed star, we may potentially get to feel the energy of this Grand Sextile. So that's next year in August, that we will start to see that sort of, more permanent sort of star happening. But this August, we're seeing 5 of the 6-pointed star being activated. So we've got Pluto in Aquarius. I wonder if I should just share my chart so that we can visualize this.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about you can share the screen. Yes. Yeah.
Yep, August, the end of August. So what we see here is Pluto in Aquarius. 60 degrees on, we've got Saturn and Neptune making a sextile. We move 60 degrees. There's Uranus in Gemini. And then 60 degrees onwards, by the end of the month, we'll have Venus there. And then moving on 60 degrees, we have Mars. And of course, the moon moves very quickly. So this is, I feel, one of the signatures of August is that we get to kind of feel a sense of this star forming for the first time in our kind of recent history. And so what does that actually mean? Well, I'm not completely sure, how this might play out, because it doesn't happen very often. However, this is one of my old astrology books called The Dynamics of Aspect Analysis by Bill Tierney. And he goes into detail of all these different aspectual patterns. And one of the ways he describes the configuration of a Grand Sextile, or the Star of David, some might call it, which is made up of 3 trines, 3 oppositions. It's kind of like you have all these creative gifts and energy and talents and all of this flourishing of inner, whatever it is, wisdom or energy or something that you have to really then think of how you're going to expand and give it out to the world. And he describes it that if you don't do something to expand this out beyond your personal space, that it can be like ripened fruit in a fruit bowl. Like, you know, when you get too many ripe fruits and you just have to eat it all because it's going to all, you know, go moldy tomorrow. So you really have to give it to everyone to share it around so you don't waste the fruit.
Right.
So I thought, well, that's an interesting analogy. And I thought, well, this is perhaps what we're all going through in August, thinking of like how we can push ourselves to go outside our current circles or space or comfort zone, whatever you want to call it, and see how we can then show our gifts or our skills or our talents to people that we're not usually used to showing that to. And so you might be thinking of, you know, that you've got a special project in mind, or, you know, there's something that you've been wanting to do for a while and you've been thinking about it. And maybe this is the month where you think, oh, you know, maybe I'll take some steps and action towards showing that to the world. And the world doesn't have to be a big public space. I mean, it could just be getting it out of your mind and into your actual tangible reality in some way. So this is just 5 points being activated this month. Next year, we'll see the 6 points being activated, which will be kind of in the middle of the year, which will be, interesting to see. Interesting to note, there is this sort of broad social consideration that Bill Tierney talks about, that we need to really expand outwards, help others, you know, with our skills in some way. And one of the last times this configuration happened in this way that I could find was just after the World War II, like in 1948. This was when President Harry Truman signed this Foreign Assistance Act. I think they call it the Marshall Plan. And this was put in place to help rebuild Western Europe after the war. So financial and material aid was then, you know, passed to be helping another nation. So something beyond your personal or immediate environment, rebuild after the war. So I thought that was interesting that on the exact day that this star kind of formulated was the signing of this Marshall Plan. And so maybe that might give your audiences a bit of an idea as to what this might be about, you know, or consider what this could be about for each person.
Yeah. And that is very interesting because I'm not truly to apply the aspect patterns that much. And so it really inspired me. I have to put more focus on the aspect patterns. But I would like to ask you, do you bring the early degree meanings into the interpretation when you describe the reason the 5 point or 6 point they have this pattern?
Well, you know, I think that's well worth considering, that because this is the early degrees, like using horary rules, for example, you know, this shows something new, something that's initiating right now. And this is a configuration that's staying for a little while longer. So, you know, that's why I thought August feels like this beginning month of like really understanding what this configuration is in the sky and what it's asking of us. And what it's asking of us is actually to expand beyond and give something to help others. There's this sort of broad social consideration tied into this star, I feel.
Yeah.
I noticed as well, I was just quickly looking back at our more recent history to see if I could find a time that, kind of fitted this configuration. And, look, it doesn't happen very often, so it was hard to find, but I noticed that the most recent time was in 2013. And this is a little bit of synchronicity. And it was around the time that Edward Snowden had done this sort of whistleblowing act, and he was charged under the Espionage Act for releasing confidential information on American government's behalf. And I'm sure everyone knows who Edward Snowden is, but I thought, oh, that's interesting, because in his mind, he would have thought, well, he did think, I'm doing this for the world. Yeah. And the other interesting thing is that that's how we met, because I was presenting a lecture on Fidaria and I used Edward Snowden as my case study, and I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So that's the more recent example of this sextile configuration.
Yeah. As you mentioned at the beginning, in fact, both of us, we only much more focus on the individual chart, the nativity. So what do you think this kind of a cosmo transit will activate the personal chart? So how can we have our own personal chart to get involved into this kind of a transit?
Well, firstly, we're dividing the chart into two divisions here, because we're looking at fire and air signs. So consider, are your planets predominantly in fire and air signs, or do you have a predominance in water and earth signs? Because this is really going to hit the fire and air houses of your chart, which is 6 houses out of the 12, right? So obviously, if you've got prominent planets in those signs, you're going to be impelled more to make big changes, or to somehow display or share your gifts to the world in some way. And then consider also these big planets. For example, if you're an Aquarius rising, Saturn, which is one of the points of the star, will be your ruler and making that sextile. So you'll have Saturn in the third making that sextile. So that, what does this say about you and your purpose, like the kinds of things that you're doing, going about in your purpose and living? How are you applying your life and intelligence? That's one point of the star. Saturn will also be, for example, this is the chart. I'm not sure if you can see, I've changed this to next year, where we're going to have the 5 points. Okay, so next year we're going to have sort of 6 points kind of being activated here. And you'll see that, for example, Mars will be with Uranus here in Gemini. And so wherever that is in your chart, it's making a statement about perhaps, I don't know, like where you're feeling volatile, or where you're wanting to rebel, and where you're wanting to really initiate your voice and to assert yourself. But, looking at that is Saturn, which is in fall in Mars's sign. And so that relationship there, could be causing some tensions. And so these are the 2 houses of that star that are causing tensions that you will probably have to work through in order to get this gift out to the world, for example. And the interesting thing is that all these 5 points will kind of be activated quite strongly most of the year. And then we kind of have this missing point here in Sagittarius. If you've got planets in early degrees Sagittarius, that personal planet, that natal placement, is completing this star. So that, to me, seems like that the purpose of that planet in your chart will become a big voice in this story of activation here of your gifts and talents to benefit the greater humanity. There's lots of ways that we can apply it, I feel, and these are just some ideas. And of course, every month as the moon moves through and activates these moments, including the missing star point, that's a momentary sort of activation every time the moon moves through, for you to be able to, make use of this very, I guess I don't know if potent's the right word, but definitely a unique and rare opportunity to bring something out that you might otherwise have just within your mindset or within the world of ideas.
It's a very interesting idea, and you even to make me thinking about myself, because I have a very significant Sagittarian. I have sun in Sagittarius.
Early degrees?
Not early, but in the middle degree. So I think it would be still in the orb, with this, this pattern. Yeah.
And I think degrees don't really matter, because this is quite a permanent sort of, well, not permanent, semi-permanent structure for these couple of years. So I feel that just even by being co-present with a sign or using whole sign aspects rather than degree-based aspects would suffice here in order to be able to tap into this kind of energy. I was just saying that use whole sign aspects. Degree-based aspects isn't that important in this degree, because it is quite a lofty kind of conceptual idea. We're not working with very specific things right now. So feel free to just use the sign-based aspects.
Because normally I only use a sign-based aspect.
Oh, right.
Yes, I think this idea is, for me as a traditional astrologer, it's a new idea for me.
Yes, and I agree. I'm also a traditional astrologer, but I guess when we're working with the modern planets, sometimes it's worth sort of looking at more modern techniques to try and work with them, I guess. Yeah, I agree. It's not something that I look at all the time.
It's very good. Even you work traditional techniques, you also have the open mind to applying the modern techniques. So it's a very brilliant way to do the astrology research.
Sure. And on top of this too, it's actually not a modern idea. I mean, as you know, I'm a student now of a Vedic astrology lineage, and there are these things called yogas, like basically planetary combinations. And, there are all sorts of yogas, which is, one of them is like all 7 planets, because they only use traditional planets, all 7 planets being in fire signs or fire and air signs. And, I did look up potentially what yogas might have been involved. And from the ones that I could find were things like all planets being in 6 of the signs, for example. They had also considered these kinds of concepts even back over 1,000 years ago. So it's certainly not a new concept. Maybe we just haven't discovered some traditional source texts around this teaching yet as revival. Yeah.
I believe some of my audience, they are quite interested about Vedic astrology. So so maybe next time we can have a chance to chat with the Vedic astrology. But unfortunately, I don't remember much of the Vedic astrology. Maybe you should remind me more. You can provide more information from the Vedic astrology to me.
Well, I am just a student, but it's blowing my mind. And because I have been really deeply into the medieval Persian Arabic texts, translations by Ben Dykes, now having studied the Vedic lineage, I can read, for example, texts like the Sal Bisha, the astrology of Sal B. Bisha, and I can see the links now to the Vedic astrology, like some of the concepts that I'm reading in those paragraphs, which never occurred to me as being that important. I'm like, this is actually a rule in Vedic astrology. And it would make sense because there was a lot of movement between the Indo-Harappan Valley sort of continent regions towards that sort of Middle Eastern regions back 1,000 years ago. So there was knowledge transmissions happening, and I'm now starting to reread Sal's text and to see the Vedic knowledge coming out, and that's really cool to observe.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, that's very cool. If we can do the comparison from the medieval to Hindu. I know at that time they have so many chance they can have the interaction. The Vedic astrologer with the Arabic astrologers.
Absolutely. So, that's one idea, is that the Persian Arabic region was really like the center of the world back then. They had a big melting pot from the Greeks in the west to the Asian sort of side and the Indians. That was why it was such a rich area. And, as you probably would agree, that's where all the best astrology comes from.
Yeah, that is why I always think Ben really did a very good contribution for the nowadays. Because of him, then that we can back to that era and to know the richful knowledge at that time.
So grateful for his work. Yeah. Amazing.
And also thanks, Sue, for your time to accept my interview, to sharing your very brilliant idea for your astrology perspective. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
我们今天苏老师的这个 interview 相当的有趣，而且呢对我来说也相当具有启发性。那如果你喜欢我们这支影片的内容，欢迎你可以分享出去给更多人看到。那如果你想要深入研究更多的占星的知识，欢迎你可以关注沙塔星空凝视占星学院。那我们下次见咯，拜拜。Thank you, Sue. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.